If you choose to believe the millions of music fans who stop listening to an artist the moment they try to, quote, go mainstream, selling out is the biggest crime a musician can commit. But not only does selling out allow more people to access their music, it can sometimes make their music better. Because the spoils of selling out, when put in the right hands, can grant artists a wider umbrella in which to create music the way they want to, without as many bumps in the recording process. Kirk Hammett, lead guitarist and chief spokesman for Sellouts, put it best when he lamented that after moving away from the metal genre and becoming a world-famous hard rock band, fans were pissed that Metallica suddenly got too big and now, quote, their favourite little band doesn't fit in their pocket anymore. It's a valid response, though one that would probably play better coming from someone who wasn't involved with Saint Anger. For the purposes of this video, we'll use the term sellout to mean anyone who made the leap into the mainstream, typically by way of signing with a major label. And for these artists, that was the best decision they could have made. So, I'm Will for WhatCulture, and here are 8 artists whose music actually got better after they sold out. Number 8, Green Day. Green Day is still seen in the eyes of millions of punk connoisseurs as the band that released the world-conquering Dookie before promptly becoming the world's biggest sellouts. For all of the punk purists, Green Day is only as good as their sophomoric odes to masturbation and male prostitutes. First of all, depending on your definition of selling out, it's quite possible that Green Day sold out before they even released Dookie by signing with a major label. As a punk band raised in the DIY world, isn't that the most egregious sin? But fine, let's use the conventional wisdom of the average fan and say that Billy Joe Armstrong and his crew officially became unfaithful to the punk ethos by writing and recording a ballad that would be used at graduation ceremonies and TV retrospectives for years to come. Good Riddance, Time of Your Life, turned Green Day into a mainstream pop rock band, which is not really the worst thing. Could you imagine a bunch of 40-year-olds writing punchy songs about the joys of fondling yourself? No, but a hard-rocking, ambitious concept album denouncing George W. Bush and detailing song by song the effects of his kind of thinking on an impressionable youth? Oh, hell yes. If you are roughly my age, you'll be well aware of how important that album was. Number 7, Nirvana. John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Kurt Cobain. When discussing musicians who have the most integrity, who were the most true to themselves and their music, and who would never dream of selling out, these 3 names always seem to pop up. And yet, all 3 of them did sell out in one form or another. When Nirvana first released Bleach on the indie label Sub Pop in 1989, it was seen as a stirring addition to the garage rock canon. Raw, punchy, and devoid of any sort of glossiness, it was the band's real defining moment in grunge. Except that it was, according to the guy who wrote the record, not very good. At all. Kurt Cobain stated that he hated Bleach for the most part because he felt he was pressured into sounding like the grunge artists of the day and making a rock record, so he had to suppress his pop sensibilities when it came to writing the songs, a mistake which he corrected with their follow-up Nevermind. Dave Grohl called Nevermind children's music, meaning it was incredibly simple and straightforward pop stuff. So either way you look at it, Nirvana made better music as sellouts. Number 6, the Sex Pistols. John Lydon, the ringleader of the Sex Pistols, has proven time and time again that he was a very lucky winner in the game of circumstance. He became an unlikely figurehead for an even less likely movement, and had it not been for some rock-solid timing, there's no way he and his band of miscreants would have made the peculiarly lasting impact they did. Despite the harshness typically thrown at 90s groups like NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys for being a part of the pop music machine, it was actually the Sex Pistols who were the first manufactured boy bands to come into the national spotlight. Because the Sex Pistols didn't start with Johnny Rotten or Sid Vicious, it started with their manager, Malcolm McLaren. McLaren pulled together a group of kids who had a specific look and attitude, and with only the tiniest level of musical ability. He particularly gravitated towards Lydon's sneering rudeness and molded them into the type of band he wanted them to be. The band wasn't about music, it was about creating controversy for the sake of controversy, and using the rebellious act as a way to sell records to kids who also didn't know how to sing or play an instrument. It was all a sham, really. They just kind of lucked into becoming the poster boys for punk because they fit neatly into the lines that McLaren had drawn. Number 5, Blondie. Oh yeah, Blondie sold out big time. She started her career as a punk chick with a hankering for the new wave scene. And what should no true punk ever do? Write a disco song. Yet that's exactly what happened with the inclusion of Heart of Glass on Blondie's 3rd album, Parallel Lines. At first, Debbie Henry wanted nothing to do with new producer Mike Chapman, because he was a Los Angeles guy and she was a New York gal. She no doubt feared the overly produced reputation of the LA scene, yet somehow she was pleased with the production of songs like Heart of Glass, even though the sound completely betrayed her punk roots. Parallel Lines is an inarguable masterpiece and gave the band their first taste of critical and commercial success. It was straight up pop rock as well, and ditched a lot of the arty flourishes they employed on their first two albums. More amazing than the resulting album though is the fact that an underground band from New York could turn into a pure pop act before everyone's eyes and escape the transition unscathed. Number 4, White Stripes. Before selling out and signing to a major label for their fourth studio album, the White Stripes were the undisputed king and queen of the garage rock revival, excelling at scuzzy blues rambling and bare bones instrumentation. Although that description could fit nearly any White Stripes release, those facets of their style were most evident in the early albums. There was also the fact that Jack and Meg had grown into competent musicians over this span of time, and yes, tracks like Hello Operator and Hotel Yorba are still among the best the band has ever produced, but in terms of overall album quality, those first three can't hold a candle to Elephant, which is nearly flawless. Then again, that's part of what drove the chance of sellouts in their direction to begin with. The Stripes were becoming too polished and perfect for their fans, who'd grown too fond of the sloppiness to accept something as solid as Elephant. Critics who chided the duo for cashing in on their gimmickry eventually caved, with many of them offering revised and improved reviews after a few years. That's the thing about being labelled a sellout. Sometimes it makes journalists sell out a little bit themselves. Number 3, r.e.m. As guitarist Peter Buck describes their major label debut, Green was an experimental album that featured major key rock songs for the first time, largely due to instructions from Michael Stipe to, quote, not write any more r.e.m. type songs. The result is incredibly haphazard, but so remarkably satisfying. Following their move to the big time, they also released Automatic for the People, which is universally considered, at the very least, a top 3 album in the band's extensive discography. The only album that could stand as an objectively better album is their official debut, 1983's Murmur, though we all know how easy it is for bands to capture lightning in a bottle with their first go-round, since they have, hypothetically, an almost unlimited amount of time to write and record it. But from that album to 1988's Green, it's hard to find an album that surpasses their major label introduction. Number 2, Modest Mouse. There is perhaps no better example of a band that came up with a firm grasp on the DIY ethos of indie rock and never unclenched, even while gaining a huge amount of exposure quite suddenly. Modest Mouse never really sold out, even though fans couldn't stomach the idea of Float On becoming a song that everybody knew, because not everybody was supposed to know about Modest Mouse. But that was the reality presented to fans once they heard Modest Mouse was crossing over to a major record label. And though it's hard to argue that the band did indeed become world famous for the angular licks of Float On a few years later, there was a brief spell where Modest Mouse was still a hidden gem tucked away on a major label. That period is represented with the best album of their unique career, The Moon and Antarctica, a sterling example of how to retain your indie cred in the face of convention. Number 1, The Beatles. Yeah, the Beatles are amazing, but despite what your parents might tell you, the Beatles didn't arrive fully formed as the mop-topped foursome who played pop songs and drove all the repressed girls crazy with their snazzy suits and odes to holding hands. That version of the Beatles wouldn't exist until manager Brian Epstein got his hands on the group. Prior to their relationship with him, the Fab Four were stereotypical greasers, rocking jeans and leather jackets. They spent their nights playing in German strip clubs and, no joke, stapling condoms to the wall and setting them ablaze because that's a sure way to get women to hold their hands. But under Epstein's tutelage, the boys underwent a drastic makeover, performing with a G-shucks attitude and synchronizing their appearances and onstage movements. Then came the classic early Beatles tunes. Then came the worldwide exposure. Then came the massive discography that is one of the most celebrated in the history of pop music. So just know that pretty much every song you've ever heard from the Beatles came after they'd already sold out. And there you have it, folks, 8 bands whose music actually got better after they sold out. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it and participate in the internet shenanigans with me on Twitter at @uslydogU. I'm Will for WhatCulture, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.